Okay, Father. Okay.
Start. Good evening. Namaskar.
Ma'am, 1 minute, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, you can start.
Thank you. Good evening. Namaskar. Swagat. Friends, I am Tanvi Dogra. I am extremely privileged and honored to be given this opportunity to welcome you all to the conversations on the fact sheet based on the study on impact of COVID-19 in rural India, a cross-sectional study from 12 states. The study was conducted by the Indian Social Institute, Delhi, in collaboration with Conference Development Office, Jesuit Conference of South Asia, and Social Justice and Ecology Secretariat, SJES South Asia. The study was carried out among the poor, marginalized, Dalits, and tribals in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, Odisha, Telangana, and West Bengal. Today, we will share the main highlights from the study. An eminent panel of experts will participate in the discussions following the release of the fact sheet and the special message from Dr. Steny D'Souza, President, Jesuit Conference of South Asia. Friends, Jesuits, and collaborators are engaged in diverse initiatives to reach out to the poor and the marginalized in India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. We have been positively contributing to the social transformation and empowerment, though at times not so visible in common parlance. We are extremely happy to welcome you all to the conversations on the fact sheet. Our friends and collaborators from across South Asia would be joining us in this event. On behalf of the Jesuit Collective, I express my gratitude and appreciation each one of you for being here today. We look forward to continuing this very important work together, building on lessons from the study conducted in more meaningful ways with your active support and collaboration. A special welcome to Mr. Ashish Kothari, Kalparesh Vikalp Sangam, Mr. Roshan Rathod, Makam, Mr. Costa Majumdar, ActionAid India, Father Martin Puthusari, Director Migrant Assistance and Information Network, Maine, Father Sebastian L. Raj, Director, Conference Development Office, Father Stany, Director of SJES, our partners, provincials, PTTs, and other collaborators in the collective. Now, let me take this opportunity to introduce our speakers. Mr. Ashish Kothari, founder of Kalpvriksh, Pune, is an eminent environmentalist active in people's movements, including Narmada Bachao Andolan, Beach Bachao Andolan, Community Forest Rights, Learning and Advocacy Network, Vikalp Sangam, and Global Tapestry of Alternatives. He has also been a guest faculty at several universities and institutes and Mellon Fellow at Borden College, USA. Ms. Roshan Rathod, Manager of Insights and Advisor at Raintree Foundation, is member of National Facilitation Team NFT, Makam, Mahila Kisan Adhikar Manch, Forum for Women Farmers' Rights, a national network of women farmers active in 25 states across India. Mr. Costa Majumdar, working with the Policy and Research Unit of ActionAid India, conducted a two-part study on the impact of COVID-19 on informal workers across India. He has both quantitative and qualitative field research experience broadly related to the human capital development of the urban poor, focusing on livelihood, migration, education, health, and skill development. Dr. Denzel Fernandez is the director of the Indian Social Institute based in Delhi. He is also the editor of the social science research journal Social Action. He is also today the moderator of the event. Now I am pleased to invite Dr. Denzel Fernandez to take this event forward. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Tanvi, for your welcome and introduction. On behalf of the Jesuit Collective, led by Indian Social Institute, I warmly welcome each one of you to this conversation on the fact sheet, which gives a brief glimpse of the findings of the study on impact of COVID-19 in rural India, a cross-sectional study from 12 states. We all know for the last more than 2 years, COVID-19 pandemic has been affecting the world. At some times, we were seriously affected. Many of us may have been also infected. I personally have been infected twice, but we have been affected in some way or the other. There has been a lot of studies done on the impact of COVID-19 in different parts of the country. A lot of the studies were done in urban areas. Also, some studies have been done in rural areas as well. When we go for conferences, we hear a lot of presentations and papers on about COVID-19 and its effect on different types of people. In this line, we felt that a lot of the studies have focused in urban areas, and so we thought we will focus on the impact of COVID-19 in rural areas. So the Jesuit Collective, along with their networks, decided to conceptualize and initiate this study last year, soon after the immediate effects of the second wave in particular. And this gives us a peek into how rural India was affected by COVID-19 and how they responded to it, and how the various social security schemes and various measures adopted by the government reached the people and how effective they were. So to start with, we shall have an electronic release of the fact sheet. So I invite Ferdinand from the CDO team to digitally release the book, the fact sheet. Yeah. Okay. So, yes, so here it is. The study. This is the front cover. Scroll down. Yeah, quickly you can scroll down, run through the. Yes, we have the introduction and the methodology, the distribution in map, general profile of respondents. Yeah, move down. Yeah, social category. Yeah, scroll down. This will be explained. educational status, occupational status, impact on livelihood and security, coping mechanisms, how MGNREGA helped. Yes. Impact on children. The health impact. How people were able to access the public health system. The treatment. Whether they were able to avail insurance. Perception of ASHA workers, and some calls for action. So this is, yeah. Yeah, so thank you, Ferdinand. Yeah, so here's the book just released. So we shall give a hand to the team. So congratulations. The study was led by Mr. Shinu Joseph and Dr. Alvin D'Souza. Shinu Joseph is associated with the Conference Development Office as Manager, Monitoring, Evaluation, and Data Analyst, and is being involved in the formulation and coordination of various researches, including this study. And Dr. Alvin D'Souza has done his PhD in Social Sciences in Economics from the University of Mysore. He had worked as head of the Human Rights and Training Unit at the Indian Social Institute, Bangalore, and presently is assistant professor in Indian Social Institute, Delhi. So I invite now Mr. Shinu and Dr. Alvin to present the fact sheet.
Thank you, Denzel. Good evening, everyone. I will begin maybe for the next 4 or 5 minutes with the general overview of this fact sheet, mentioning the methodology that was used, and also especially the health impact of COVID-19. And then Shinu will come in with the rest of the issues he will discuss then. Okay. So we have just released this fact sheet titled Impact of COVID-19 in Rural India, a cross-sectional study from 12 states. So as you see this picture, it's a collaborative study, and different units, different organizations were brought in, and this study was conducted. And definitely it would not have been possible without the help of so many people. So this was the initiative of CDO, Conference Development Office, earlier under the head of CG Chako, Dr. CG Chako. Now presently Dr. Sebastiraj is in charge. And then we made use of partners in the field, Lokmanch partners, main partners, that is Migrant Assistance and Information Network, to do this study from the field, because as you know, it was difficult to travel during that time, COVID time. And so we made use of this existing infrastructure to conduct this study. Okay. So these are the contents. I must tell you that this is only a kind of initial release. So the final report will come eventually after looking into, examining Other tools of research, that is FGDs and the case studies, we have about 190 of them, 190 each of them, 190 case studies, 190 FGDs. So once we assess all that, examine all that, then we'll come out with a detailed complete report. As of now, we have only focused on the data collected through Toolbox, what Toolbox, yeah. Okay. I will go to the methodology. As I said, this study made use of both qualitative and quantitative research methods. And for quantitative research, we made use of this research software, Kobo Toolbox, and analyzed the data through SPSS. And samples were collected from the intervention areas of Jesuit Conference of India, JCI, through a purposive sampling method. For tool 1, that was interview schedule with the households, we received about 5,210 samples against the targeted sample size of 4,800. We had kind of limited it to 400 samples from each state, so that totals up to 4,800. And then for tool 2, we received about 1,924 samples against, again, the limited sample size of 1,796. And as you can see this on the screen, it covered about 474 villages from 46 districts of 12 states. Okay. This is the sample distribution across the case study states, 12 states. This is a sample distribution for tool 1. Okay. General profile of the respondents, I will quickly run through this. As I said, 5,210 respondents, of which 52% were male, 47% were female, and 1% others. A vast majority of them belong to SC/ST category, totaling about 75%. And majority of them were from very poor income background and earning less than 5,000, earning less than 5,000 a month, and they constituted a large majority. And with regard to the education status, 42% were illiterate, 30% had studied only up to the secondary level, and largely for just about 12% had studied beyond secondary level. And since the data is coming primarily from the rural areas and rural India, so 46% of the respondents were landless laborers. Okay, now I'll focus on the health impact of this COVID-19. I have selected just about, I have about 2-3 slides focusing on this. Important highlights only. Okay, with regard to the access, it is interesting to note that 67% of the population accessed public health institution during this time, during COVID time. That goes on to say the impact of the spread of the public health institutions and reliance on those institutions by the rural population. And about 34% of them said due to the inadequacies in the public health institutions, they were kind of forced to visit private health facilities. When it comes to the health expenditure, we felt that the data shows that 32% spent over rupees 5,000 for COVID related treatment, and about 25% said that they spent over rupees 10,000 for COVID related treatment. We also focused on non-COVID related treatment also. There were reports that many were not allowed and all that. They've struggled for other non-COVID related treatment during COVID time. So many of them said they had to kind of borrow a lot of money. 45% said that they borrowed money for COVID-related treatment, and 46% faced difficulties to get treatment for non-COVID-related treatment. And health insurance is a major issue, as we know, but its spread in the rural areas is still minimum, and that is shown in the data as well. Only 11% availed health insurance during COVID-19. And when it comes to their preference for a particular medical treatment, and they said the data shows that 60% preferred allopathic treatment. We also have recorded the perceptions of the stakeholders here, ASHA workers being the main stakeholders when it comes to health in rural areas. And there were a lot of questions posed to them. We have highlighted just about 2 here. 62% of the ASHA workers said the public health institutions have desired facilities in their respective areas. Then about 77% said people in their area could not afford to pay for COVID-related treatment. So this is the health impact I have focused on. Now I invite Shinu to come in and focus on rest of the things and make the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, all. Am I audible?
Yes,
No?
yes, you're audible. Yes, please.
Okay.
You make full screen. Yeah.
Okay, sir. I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to have a quick revisit to the times of COVID. This you can see the emotions of the people from different villages we have captured. And I'll be mainly presenting on 2 themes, that is impact of COVID-19 on the children, and second one, impact on the COVID on the livelihood and social security. First I will start with children, because children are the world's most valuable resource, and it is best hope for the future. So I'll start the impact of COVID on the children. Children were facing different kind of problems. First, regarding their learning, the data shows that digital divide has greatly impacted children's learning in rural areas. This is one of the areas which children were facing. 70% of the household responded that children faced problems in their learning during the pandemic. This is the different types of issues which they faced. 46% felt that non-access to digital infrastructure. Many of them didn't have mobile to access online classes, and some of them, they have been denied online classes due to non-submission of fees and network coverage issues. These were the different issues they were facing during the time of the COVID. So the perceptions of the teachers, we contacted many teachers and head of the schools. They told us that 58% of stakeholders, they told that many children couldn't access digital infrastructure and they couldn't attend classes. So at this point, which I take on livelihood and social security, 71% they responded as that they have lost of livelihood due to COVID. It is greatly affected in the states of Uttar Pradesh, Orissa, and Bihar. While we look on the issues of women, they also face similar kind of issues. 34% of them, the respondents were women. They faced issues of livelihood options due to COVID-19. These are, while we taking care of marginalized communities like SC, general, and other backward communities, most of our respondents like SC and ST categories, they were said that 54% of them claiming loss of livelihood during the pandemic. So they were adopting different coping mechanisms. Many of them, they were taking loans from cooperatives. They borrowed from money lenders. They took loans from banks, and they got many monetary support and non-monetary support from their relatives. They also managed from, like 44% of the households could cope with the loss of livelihood through their own savings. Rest of them, they were managing through different options like taking loans and borrowing money from others. So 44% that they could do it from their savings. And while we take care of social security schemes, we have found that Manrega has played an important role during the time of COVID. So, however, we have found that 40% they didn't have a Manrega card holder, but those who were having the card, 21% of the card holders didn't get work, 14% got less than 25 days of work. So they could manage with Manrega, but many of them responded that they could survive with Manrega jobs. So availability, while we are asking the questions on the like availability of midday meals, many responded that they got midday meals in the form of dry ration kits and also in the form of cash transfer. So at 56% they told that they didn't receive midday meals in any forms, in the form of dry ration kit or cash transfer. So the importance, while we were checking the importance of PDS. So 58% of the response said that PDS was important during the period of COVID. We also got the perception of stakeholders like ASHA worker, head of the school, sarpanch, ward members, and Anganwadi staff. Those were closely associating with people during the time of COVID. So 95% of the stakeholders that social security schemes were very important, either important or very important during the time of COVID. So these are the recommendations. We need to support the ongoing school-going children through the forms of incentives, of improved quality of midday meals, waiver of school fees, etc. The other one regarding the social schemes, they said that there were schemes were there, but they were not receiving PDS in the like full quota of the rations. They were facing biometric issues. So this has to be corrected. Then only they will be able to get the full support through these different schemes. Thank you all. I take this opportunity to support, like, thanks to Lokmanch partners, other collaborators, and also especially JCSA collective team to conduct this survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alvin D'Souza and Mr. Shinu Joseph, for your study and presentation of this fact sheet. We have some insights into what the people in rural areas experienced. Now, if anyone wants to ask any questions, you can put in the chat, whether you're on YouTube or over here in the Zoom. So we will take them up later. So we will listen to the host of speakers today. We begin with Dr. Jerome Stanislaus D'Souza. We are privileged to have him among us. He's the president of the Jesuit Conference of South Asia. Prior to this assignment, he was the provincial of the Karnataka Jesuit province. He has been taking keen interest in promoting networks in the conference, especially in the context of the Universal Apostolic Preferences and Conference Apostolic Priorities. So I welcome Dr. Stanislaus D'Souza to give his message for all of us.
Respected guests, especially the speakers of the day, Ashish Kotari, Roshan Rathod, Kaustubh Majumdar, the moderator, Father Denzel, and you, all people of goodwill. Good evening. I'm sure you have heard the following lines from the beautiful poem of Elizabeth Browning. The earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush aflame with God. But only those who see take off the shoes. The rest sit round and pluck blackberries. It is important to see. One who sees properly, judges, and acts appropriately. It is true that the pandemic, which unleashed havoc, was disastrous. But it was also a sign of the times for those who had eyes to see. They then judged and acted accordingly. Like many other people of goodwill, we just wish to read the pandemic as a sign of the times, reflected on it and responded to it. When the tragedy broke out and the sudden decision of the government left the migrants on the streets, we came out with the intervention called Migrant Assistance and Information Network, what we call MAIN. When people were struggling to make their ends meet, we undertook a multidimensional relief work for about 20 lakh people in 25 states across India. When the people were at their lowest ebb, not knowing how to fulfill their basic needs, we also undertook a study on the impact of COVID in rural India, which was launched and made public a while ago. The study is revealing. It affirms once again that the worst victims of the COVID are the poor, the Dalits, the tribals, the landless, the women, the children. Besides the loss of many of their dear and near ones, they also lost their livelihood. The unkindest cut of all was even amidst the tragedy, they were deprived of their entitlements and social securities, which made their lives almost unbearable. It is in this context that we realize that what ISI Delhi, Conference Development Office and others have done is truly remarkable, and it needs acknowledgement, appreciation, and affirmation. They engage with the poor in multiple ways. They try to walk and work with, to listen to and learn from them. Moreover, they join hands with others, especially the people of goodwill, as their work is a collective, as they say, a collaborative venture. I'm particularly happy with this study about the COVID impact on the rural poor, which is quite comprehensive. I'm sure a study of this nature will open the eyes of all, especially the government, and help it first to see, then judge, and finally act to assist the poor efficiently in and through the social security schemes, PDS, and suitable healthcare facilities. I congratulate all those who are involved in this study. Kindly put your hands together for this team. Once again, thank you very much for coming together in large number and discerning about the poor and their plight. I'm sure ventures like these will further help us raise the quality of life and work of the distressed people. Thank you. May your tribe increase.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stanislaus D'Souza, for your message for all of us. And I'm sure it's a great encouragement for the team, not only the team over here in Delhi, but also all those involved in collecting data. They are all over here, either on the Zoom or watching on YouTube. So we now move on to our guests, our speakers for the day. We have with us is Mr. Ashish Kothari, has joined us. I suppose he has joined us. Okay, so we shall have Roshan Rathod. She's the manager of Insights Advisor at Raintree Foundation. So I invite her to give her comments. So she was also involved in similar studies, so her experience. So Roshan Rathod. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me for this discussion today. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. So I'm a part of Maqam, which is Mahila Kisan Adhikar Manch, which is a forum for recognizing women farmers as farmers and securing their identity. So last year, we released a report to understand the impact of COVID-19 on women farmers. Now, women farmers as a category itself, as we know, is a very understudied and underlooked at category. And it was very important as Maqam as a platform to look at the exact kind of impact that COVID was having on women farmers. And when we look at women farmers, there is a broader definition that we would like to look at. Which includes not only cultivators on their own farmlands, but also agricultural laborers, also women involved in fisheries, NTFP collectors, which are non-timber forest produce collectors, as well as livestock rearers. So in the month of July 2020 is when we started, when we finalized the study, and it was a very participative process where different states. The study was conducted across 11 states of the country, and more than almost 930 women farmers were surveyed as a part of this study. And the process was very participatory, where all state chapters came together, discussed what the issues were that women farmers were actually facing, because these were lived experiences that were coming in from the field sites. Maqam as a platform has women farmers as members, as individuals, as civil society members, and different organizations working on ground. So as it was a collaborative process that we undertook, and we were trying to look at the different kind of challenges that women farmers were facing, because of the lockdown that was induced and consequent challenges that they anticipated for the Kharif 2020 season as well. And we also wanted to look at, there are different aspects which are not a part of the everyday conversations, which are, let's say, health and sanitation, domestic violence, access to institutional mechanisms, etc. Now, these were conversations that were not really coming up while we were talking with women farmers during the lockdown. So this was also information that we really wanted to capture. So I'll quickly take you through the kind of the findings that we had. As I said, that there were different categories of women farmers based on their primary and secondary sources of livelihood. Interestingly, we found that, of our total 930 respondents, 60% of the respondents were landless, and 26 had only between 1 to 3 acres of land, which showed us that most of our farmers that responded were either landless or small and marginal farmers. And out of the 930 respondents, 65 were engaged in cultivation. From the cultivators' perspective, when we try to understand the issues, mainly as we know that the majority of the agriculture that is carried out is rain-fed, and particularly women's access to irrigation is extremely limited. Irrigation as a space which intersects technology as well is an extremely masculine space, as we call it, and hence 45% of the women reported having no access to irrigation. And interestingly as well, that even though the percentage of households accessing their own well decreased, households were actually sharing resources within, amongst themselves to take care of their Rabi harvest. We also found out that 12% of the households said that they were cultivating grains and cereals this year as compared to last year for the Kharif 2020 season. And this, we could say that the entire world and particularly our rural areas were facing an extreme food security crisis at that moment. And these were decisions that women farmers were taking on their own, that we need to diversify our cropping patterns, and hence their decision to diversify their cropping patterns for Kharif 2020 were reported. Most of the challenges that cultivators really faced at that time, it was also the time when we collected this data, was also the time which was the harvest time for the Rabi crop, which is your winter crop, and it gets harvested around March. And because of the lockdown, many of the farmers responded that they were unable to either harvest their crops, had not completely harvested their crops, or had only partially harvested their crops. Now, availability of labor was a very big issue for them. And because of the availability, which was so low, there were increased wage rates. And that's why families were trying and utilizing their own family labor to harvest these. But because of mobility issues, so many of the farmers had lands in different villages. Especially like if you look at the state of Uttarakhand, there is terrace farming, and the lands are very, very far away from where they live. So because of the mobility issue, they weren't even able to access their farmlands for harvesting, and suffered huge losses when it came to marketing their crops as well. Most of them, because of transportation not being available, had absolutely no access. And there was immense, there was a lot of support that was coming in from civil society members, but the government support was limited to issuing entry passes only for them. So this was a time where we saw that a lot of women's collectives were coming in together to help each other and organize transport for each other, to market their produce in villages. When we look at agricultural laborers, another category that we looked at, we saw that only 67% of our women said that they received between 0 to 100 rupees at wage rates during 2019, where you look at the national average being almost 170 to 180. And only 25% said that they received between 102 to 200 rupees. Many of them, because we were doing a comparative study, our comparison was based on 2019 Kharif season and then comparing it to consequent Rabi 2020 and Kharif 2020, had experienced an extreme reduction, like more than 50% of our women had experienced a complete reduction in the availability of work as well. Now, this was attributed to a larger extent to because the wage rates had increased and people did not have the kind of cash flows to hire agricultural laborers, and that families were now using their own familial labor on their farms. And that is why, like from a livelihoods perspective, there was a complete decrease in income for agricultural laborers during that time. Now, when you look at livestock rearers, another, and this is an allied activity that almost every other farming family is engaged in. Almost 40% of our respondents were engaged in livestock rearing. And the major challenges that were cited by them was because of, again, the mobility issue. They were not able to take their cattle to grazing lands, which were far away. And almost 40% reported an inability to access feed and fodder. Feed and fodder was a major issue for women farmers, especially in areas like Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh, where accessibility is anyway, like the area itself is characterized by inaccessibility. So under normal circumstances, this becomes an issue. And during a lockdown, it became a bigger issue for them. Within the community, there are many reasons for, there are many purposes of livestock rearing, whether it's sale of animals, whether it's sale of value addition products, sale of milk, eggs, dairy, etc. And many of them do send it to different markets, nearby towns, etc., to get a higher price for themselves. But 76% during the lockdown period were forced to sort of sell only within their villages, and that is why, and they were getting very less prices as well. And many of these products, like milk, eggs, are also perishable products. So there was very little bargaining power that women farmers had at that time to sell their produce. And 26% said that they had absolutely no income, which meant like zero income for them during the lockdown months. And even if they did, it was a meager 1,000 to 5,000 range, and 30% of them reported that they had this kind of a range of earning. When you look at NTFP collectors, which are non-timber forest produce collectors, our 43 respondents were NTFP collectors, and 74% of them recorded a decrease in income. Now, these were attributed to a lot of reasons, especially one of them being mobility. They have to access the forest, to harvest their produce. And this was one of the biggest issues that, due to lack of mobility, they were not able to access the forest. And many of them had also faced police violence, while accessing these. And if you look at, if you look at the community that is engaged in NTFP collection, Gram Sabha as a unit for them is an extremely important institutional mechanism. And because none of these meetings were happening at that time, many of the decisions that get taken democratically in these institutions were completely inaccessible to this community. And that is why there was a detrimental effect on their livelihoods at that time. And only 16% of the respondents received MGNREGA work in these lands. And that's a very insignificant number when you look at it from a social security point of view. Now, if you look at, fisheries as well, 31 out of our 930 women were involved in fisheries, whether inland or in marine fishery. Again, for them, fish being a perishable product, sale of that product became extremely difficult during the lockdown months. And this is their month. These are their months where there is an increase in sales because it's a pre-breeding season. But because of the lockdown and because of the fear of diseases that people had at that time, local fisherwomen lost out a lot in terms of livelihood because there was a decrease in demand and in prices, and absolutely an absence of like cold storage facilities for them or any kind of government support that came in for them. Merely NGOs were reaching out to this community, so government support systems were quite inaccessible to them. Can I take another 5 to 10 minutes? Or are we short on time?
Maybe
5 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay. Then when you look at it from social security entitlements point of view, and you look at women farmers, having documentation has been one of the biggest issues that even Maqam as a platform has been very vocally advocating for. And we saw that most of our respondents were not even eligible because they didn't have the necessary documents in place to access a lot of the social security entitlement schemes that could have been accessible for them. Many of them could not access banks. Loans that were earlier being taken from banks now were being taken from SHGs and other cooperatives and money lenders at higher rates. But the good part, the positive side to this was that SHGs as a space, as a social space and as an economic space for women, turned out to be a very positive space for them. And there was there was a very, feeling of belongingness that was coming in from the women farmers for this, because of the SHGs. Then when you look at food security, now this is something very ironical that we found that when we're talking about farmers and farmers cultivating, whether on their own land or as agricultural laborers, when you are cultivating this food and then in a lockdown situation, 39% saying that we don't even have sufficient food grains for our own consumption. And that was a very ironical part, that we discovered that while you're the growers of the food, you're unable to, to suffice your own consumption at your household level. Many of them did not have access to ration. The PDS system at that point, because the distribution centers itself were not getting those supplies, the PDS system also was kind of failing at that point of time and making it extremely difficult for marginal and vulnerable households to access food security during the lockdown periods. And at that time was the time when, PM, the announcement of when we have the 5 kg wheat rice or the 1 kg pulses, maximum of them during the lockdown months had not even been able to access the PDS and get the adequate amount of food and grains. Many women actually had even foregone one meal a day because, as we know that how the patriarchal system really has been, is that women are the last ones to eat. And in a situation where there is extreme insecurity of food, they are the ones who let go of their meals, and they are the ones who, let go of their nutritional security. So because they didn't have enough food, they were letting go of one meal a day. So I just want to quickly, from Makam's point of view, what we have a few short-term to medium-term and long-term recommendations. And many of them you can access through the report. I'll share a link, and I'll ask my colleague to share the link. But one of the most important things that I would like to address here is that COVID-19 and the induced lockdown showed us the cracks and the crevices of the entire system, and how the system was failing our rural community, and especially our women farmers. And this was a time, and I think that this is an opportunity to rebuild, to support, and to strengthen ecologically sound rural livelihoods for women. All the kind of livelihood options that I gave an example of, and who were our respondents, we need to have more investments in women farmers as a category. We need to have more investments made in agriculture, in water, and in other commons that women depend on. And these policies need to be more gender inclusive and gender responsive. We need to move away from being only gender inclusive, and we need to be gender responsive in these policies to help women farmers. And so that the next time something like that happens, we're a much more robust and resilient community. Yes, thank you. I hope I've not gone over.
Thank you very much, Roshan, for your presentation and sharing your study on women farmers. I think the perspective of women is very critical to understanding the whole picture, and I think you presented your findings, which has been very insightful as well. So thank you
so much.
And if there are any questions to Roshan, we can take it up. Now, Mr. Ashish Kothari has joined us, and he's, as you know already, he has been introduced earlier, the founder of Kalpvriksh, based in Pune. I welcome him to give his presentation.
Thank you, Denzel. I'm so sorry that I was not able to join earlier. There was a scheduling clash, which tends to happen these days with too many Zoom meetings. So thanks for this opportunity, and thanks of course also for the study that you all have done and put together in a very nice graphic form. I think it's a very important study. There, as you noted in that report itself, there have been a number of such studies, but you've also taken some new angles or different angles, and I think that's really, really important. I mean, as the report has very well brought out, and what I just heard from also what Roshan was saying, it's quite clear that COVID has had such an incredibly negative, severe impact on communities, especially the most vulnerable, marginalized.
Please mute.
Yeah, especially the most marginalized communities or marginalized sections of communities and scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, landless women, children, etc., and or widows, or people who are already marginalized also from a social point of view, like LGBTQ, of course, casual labor, daily wage labor, and so on and so forth. And that these impacts have been multifold, as in not many have lost livelihoods, not had adequate access to food, and had health impacts. So multiple different kinds of things, and that's been really well brought out in your study, and also many others like the Makam one. I think in terms of coping mechanisms, what I saw in your report, in terms of being able to have access to money, where money is part of the strategy to survive. So that's obviously been a very, very important one, whether it's money lenders or other sorts of funds or SHGs, like Roshan just said. But also equally, and this is something perhaps that we need to look at further, I know that Maqam has done some work on it and other networks, is coping mechanisms where you are able to fall back on other community mechanisms of mutual aid, which is not necessarily monetary, and also fall back on nature and natural ecosystems. And I'll come back to this when I speak about some of the kinds of stories of resilience that we've been able to help put together. So I think that's very crucial, because the lessons that one learns from that is not just access to, of course, access to social security schemes and access to sources of money, but also other ways by which people can actually survive, especially in terms of things like food and local livelihoods and health. And there, your recommendations of stronger public health systems, I think that was one of the biggest lessons, how our public health system is so incredibly weak, and especially with regard to marginalized peoples. Stronger social security, where unfortunately our government seems to be going the other direction, reducing money for NREGS, etc. And empowerment of marginalized, especially rural women. So I think all of these recommendations you've come up with are obviously very crucial. What I'd like to do in the next 5 minutes or so is to focus on stories of resilience, which are exceptional in the sense that they are not the common phenomenon we've seen in these last 2 years. The common phenomenon is what you people have all brought out. But because these are exceptions, they provide to us very, very critical lessons on what policy directions or civil society actions we need to take further, beyond also what you people have already brought out. So what we did in those 2 years was through the process, the platform called Vikalp Sangam, which is trying to bring a lot of alternative initiatives together. We, Kalpavriksha and many others, including Maqam, the Community Forest Rights Learning and Advocacy Network, and many others, brought together so far about 75 to 80 stories from around India of where communities, both rural and urban, were more resilient, coped better during the COVID pandemic, and especially during the economic lockdowns, than others. And if so, why? So let me just give you some 5-6 sort of key things that happened and lessons emerging from that. So one, we found that where either the Gram Sabha or the Panchayat or the Adivasi, the council or whatever the local institution, governance institution was, where it was active and empowered, they were able to cope much better. One really good example of that is Kunaria Panchayat in Kutch, where even before Prime Minister Modi's rather disastrous announcement of lockdown happened, that community locked down, but in a very different way. As soon as they heard of the possibilities of what COVID could do, they actually, in a sense, shut their borders, but not in the same way that was imposed by the government. They said, we will make sure that people going and coming out are screened in a certain way, but also that all economic activities in the village will continue. NREGS will continue, whatever other economic activities are carrying on, except for not too much having external trade. Because of that, actually, people did not lose livelihoods, certainly not in the same way that they did elsewhere. But they also brought in health measures. They also brought in regular screening. They also brought in, I'll come back to that, very interesting educational innovations. And this is something we found elsewhere also, that where the Gram Sabhas, Panchayats, etc., were empowered and active, the village was able to cope much better. The community was able to cope much better. The second thing is where other kinds of community systems were intact or had been rebuilt. For instance, systems of mutual aid, where the less privileged parts of the community are helped by those who are more privileged for whatever historical reasons. They might have more resources or more land or whatever, but there was a mechanism of some kind of help that was already initiated, maybe even before COVID or then during COVID, and that seemed to work much better. Or where community funds had been built up, so that you were not then dependent on individual money lenders nor on government or banks, but in fact the community had self-generated a fund, either through forest-based enterprises or other kinds of things, and that fund then became crucial to help tide over those families that did not have enough resources during the COVID pandemic. This happened, for instance, in many villages in Gadchiroli district of Maharashtra, where after having claimed collective forest rights, they have been able to generate substantial community funds by selling some of their forest produce. The third thing that happened in many places was other structures of solidarity, which already existed or which were created. So for instance, we have examples of youth in Calcutta who created a process called Adore, which worked with and helped homeless women, especially elderly homeless women who were facing serious crises, obviously, during the COVID pandemic. What they did was that they worked with them and the neighborhood in which these women were, on the streets or wherever, and created a sense of solidarity where the households in that neighborhood were actually then helping, feeding, and building a relationship. Earlier, it was just one homeless woman who was sitting on the street. Now they knew the name, they knew the history a little bit. That relationship is actually carried on even beyond that, where you then find a sense of community coming in to help the most marginalized section. And we have many stories of young people actually reaching out to do this kind of thing from different parts of India. A fourth thing is access to relatively intact nature and natural resources. Again, going back to Gadchiroli, where they have been able to protect the forest or regenerate it using the Forest Rights Act or other processes, they were able to fall back on forest foods, on medicines from the forest, where that knowledge still existed. And so but in addition to having monetary resources, they also actually had natural resources, especially for food. And this is a very vital thing because forest foods, as we know, or wetland foods, as we know, are very important for additional nutrition and food security. The fifth thing is local foods. Now, I think I heard Roshan saying that even where farmers grow their own foods, they had food problems, which is very correct. But where we've had movements, such as, for instance, the 5,000 Dalit women farmers of the Deccan Development Society in Telangana, where they've created their own food sovereignty and food security, the entire economic lockdown and pandemic period, they had no food problems. In fact, they were collecting food to be able to give to the district relief measures. Now, these are not big farmers. These are women farmers with 1 acre, 2 acres of land. But they have created such an incredible local, sustainable, agroecological, dryland-based farming, based mostly on millets and local rice and pulses, that they have enough for themselves, but also able to, the whole spirit and value of the community is such that they're saying, okay, for this period, we will not sell it in the market. We will actually donate it to the district relief, food stocks. Same thing with Northeast Network in Nagaland, who were able to do something very similar. I think both DDS and NEN are also part of Makam, Roshan, if I'm not mistaken. Then, so that was the fifth one. The sixth one, learning problems. You people, I think in your report, you've said very rightly that for education, there were huge problems where kids were not able to go to school and not everybody has smartphones, etc. So again, back to Konaria. So they actually created a system of home-based learning or smaller groups in hamlets. So the kids were not coming to the main school, but they had these smaller where some adults would then volunteer to teach. But they also created a system in which adults in the households were teaching kids not the regular things, but traditional music or ways of cooking or recipes or tree planting or farming, whatever the skills were. So you actually created an opportunity for intergenerational learning at the time that schools were shut down. Okay, and so that was very interesting what they did with Konaria did with education. Sixth or seventh, I'm sorry, I've run out. I've lost count of how many, the number, was localized livelihoods, which were producer-consumer relations, which were somewhat localized. So for instance, this group called Navdarshanam, close to Bangalore, they already had relations between the farmers and consumers in Bangalore, which they reactivated during the COVID pandemic. They got special permission to make sure that the food could be picked up and taken to Bangalore, straight to the households. And so the households kept getting good organic food in Bangalore, and the farmers were also able to continue selling some of their produce. But that only happened because it was it wasn't a very long distance trade relationship. And I think this is an absolutely crucial lesson coming out of this, that the more we are able to localize our economy, especially for basic needs, the more resilient we are to pandemics or crises of this kind. And this becomes important for dealing with the climate crisis also, because this is going to happen more and more with all kinds of disasters, so-called disasters, natural disasters. Last thing was about health. So we had examples where, for instance, with the Tribal Health Institute, with Kunari, I've already given you the example, but in South India, in Tamil Nadu, the Tribal Health Institute in Sitilingi immediately swung into action. They already had a local hospital who was working with the community. They sort of intensified that work, made sure that everybody in the community was aware of what COVID is exactly, what precautions to take, no panic, just sort of very basic understanding and common sense things. And the Sarpanch, a woman Sarpanch who actually had been a nurse in the Tribal Health Institute, she was, obviously very, very well equipped to deal with this, but the THI also then extended further service to that. And so in that first phase, especially, and also mostly in the second phase of the pandemic, Sitilingi was much better off than a lot of the other villages in that area where this kind of relationship had not been built up, where community health systems were much more strong in this place. And finally, where there was civil society and government support of some kind. So example I can think of is in Kerala, the entire Kudumbushri network, which is local women in hundreds of villages supported by the government. And it was that Kudumbushri network that created the community kitchens that helped people who didn't have enough food, extended health facilities, etc. So I think I'm just giving you all of these. I'll put in the chat where you can find links to all these stories for downloading in multiple languages. But the point really is that it is these sorts of systems that need to be strengthened by policy, by government support, and by civil society organizations and research institutions, so that we're pointing to the problem, but we're also pointing to not just theoretical recommendations and suggestions, but also here's what actually practically has happened. It's not up in the air, it's actually on the ground, and more of this can happen if we had these sorts of policies. The last point is that we then, out of this in the first year, also set up something called Vikalp Sutra. I'll put the link in the chat, which is a national network to try and bring together experiences of creating or sustaining dignified livelihoods. Now, one obvious thing is that people, like casual labor or industrial labor, etc., have no dignity in their work. They can be fired at any point in time. They're in bad working conditions. They're looked down upon by the general public, etc. So how does one create a national system of dignified livelihoods, both in the traditional sectors and in the modern sectors? And so the network basically tries to see, okay, where such experiences exist and expertise exists in communities and NGOs and institutions, etc., and where it is needed, can some linkages be made so that you cross-learn, you share experiences, you share expertise, you share schemes, etc., where then people who need it can access and don't necessarily have to go back to the same insecure, undignified livelihoods that they had before COVID. So, yeah, I'm sorry, maybe that was a bit too long, but just wanted to share some of these experiences. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ashish, for this wonderful presentation, not only of your experience and knowledge, but also the many stories of resilience that you mentioned. So it is not, only data, but also grassroots experiences of resilience of the people that you have shared, which we all should learn, and from these experiences, probably policy could be built. So now we move on to the next speaker, Mr. Kaustav Mujumdar. He is in India. Welcome. Kaustav, over to you.
Thank you. Greetings to everyone. I'm really honored to be part of this discussion. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And as you have already mentioned, that the impact of COVID-19 has been documented well enough, but most of it covers mainly cities, and the impact in rural areas has not been studied that much. So this is a welcome study. This study is welcome to see what COVID-19 has done to the rural India, which still constitutes almost 70% of India's population. We might talk about an urban future, but India's present scenario is still pretty much rural. So from that point of view, this study is a very welcome. The study has highlighted very few key elements. For example, the loss of livelihoods, and especially in case of women and marginalized communities like SC, ST, who have faced this loss higher than the rest. Then it has shown the indebtedness and the source of debt, the reason for debt, that people are taking loans to fund their basic consumption needs, food consumption, household expenses. So the kind of poverty, the kind of precarity that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought down on the lives of people has been well documented. And also the importance of social security, like the PDS, the NREGA, and the public health care. So it's a very good document. The impact of COVID-19 on children's education is widely known, and more so in case of India, where the digital literacy or the digital connect is not there. In 2019, 42% of urban population and 15% of rural population had access to internet, and less than 12% of government schools had internet facilities. So and that is for entire India. For rural India, it will be even lesser. So we can imagine what would have happened to the children who were when the schools were shut. But I want to emphasize that the pandemic, while it has exacerbated these precarity, this precarity has existed for long. The pandemic has just brought it out to the fore. For example, when we are talking about rural India, agricultural distress is a well-known fact. In 1990, around 30% of India's population, 30% of India's GDP came from agriculture, while 60% of India's population was employed in in agriculture. In 2019, the figures were around 15% of GDP and 50% of the labor force. So we can imagine that while the contribution to GDP has come in half, there has only been a marginal change in the labor force employed in agriculture. So this shows that share of income in agricultural sector has decreased, but a share of workers has not decreased proportionately. And this has made that agriculture has become saturated. In rural areas, agriculture has become saturated. Agriculture can no more accommodate new workers joining in the labor force. And not just this, we are also seeing that the effects of climate change, although which has not that well been documented that how it is affecting the rural to urban migration, but it is still going on. So the rural to urban migration, the farmer suicides, these are all examples of what the agricultural distress is, which has been happening even before the pandemic. Now, fall in rural consumption, this was also documented before the pandemic. There was this NSSO report, which was then again backtracked by the government, citing some data issues, which says it was in, I think around 2018 or 19, which said that in the past 7 years, rural consumption levels have consistently fallen. And this was the existing scenario even before the pandemic. And we know that non-farm incomes, which include the remittances from the migrant workers, they consider around 60% of rural income. Now, when the lockdown happens and when the migrant workers lose their livelihoods, you can imagine that what will happen on the income of the entire rural community. You don't have any more remittances, and this highly impacts the non-farm income. And with decline in the remittances, the consumption patterns have fallen. Several studies have shown this, that the consumption patterns have fallen during the pandemic. For example, Azim Premji University's study have said that 90% of the households have reduced their consumption during the pandemic. Even ActionAid's own study said that in August of 2020, 68% of rural respondents had insufficient food. Now, loss of food expenditure affects everyone, but it affects women more. We can see through NFHS data that the health indicators for women and children in this country is not at all good. It's not good for anyone in this country, but overall women's are even worse. Now, if there is a reduction in consumption, overall consumption, there will be, first, women would be affected. And also their consumption basket also changes. There will be reduction in consumption of milk and milk products, then animal proteins, fats, fruits and vegetables. These are the first things that the people have reduced eating. Now, what this happens is that this again affects the nutrition level of the community. And now they are only eating cereals, rice, wheat, whatever they're getting. And this has been again incentivized by the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. I mean, it is a welcome step, the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, that you are giving out 5 kgs of wheat or rice and 1 kg of pulses per month. But cereals and pulses are not enough to sustain the life. I mean, there have been instances of people selling around 2-3 kgs of rice or wheat to buy other essentials, especially oil, cooking oil, then or even agricultural inputs. I mean, those who have marginal lands, they are selling these around 2 kgs or 3 kgs of rice and wheat that they were getting from PMGKY to buy agricultural inputs so that they can have some income support. Now, gradually, as savings also got depleted, people have started taking loans to meet the basic needs, which has been again very much highlighted in this study. ActionAid's own studies said that around 75% of people took loans for food consumption to meet their food expenditure. 35% on healthcare, 25% on electricity bills, 15% transport, education. So these are all household expenditures. People are taking loans for meeting these minimal household expenditures, and also the source of the loans. Majority of the people took loans from their known networks. It's whether friends, relatives, neighbors. Now, they also had a limited amount of money to give as credit. Employers were not willing to give loans, neither employers nor contractors. Banks were not going to give loans without any collateral anyway. And given that the reason of credit was food consumption, no bank would have given the loan. And this this was during the pandemic. Now, before the pandemic, again, there's this agricultural statistics released by the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India. It was in 2019 they released these statistics that 52% of agricultural households were in debt, and average debt was around 60% of their annual income. Now we can now consider what the pandemic did. So what happened? Now people need to consume. So new microcredit companies started cropping up. We have received these stories from various ActionAid offices across the country that these gave the small loans to these households, and now people are getting into debt bondage. People were getting into debt bondage even earlier as well, but it has increased because they don't have the capacity to repay the loans, and now they are getting into debt bondage. We are hearing these stories from Punjab, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, various parts of India, that landless laborers are again getting into debt bondage because of the loss of income and livelihood during the pandemic. Now, we, as you have also interviewed ASHA workers and Anganwadi workers, we must acknowledge the work that ASHA and Anganwadi workers have done during this pandemic. They were at the front lines. They were at the front lines of the rural health mission, and their efforts have been recognized by the United Nations as well recently. But still, they are not compensated properly. They are not even recognized as frontline workers by our own government. The government of India does. ASHA workers are not even considered as workers; they're considered volunteers. So this is the level of precarity in which the rural and the informal workers in India are there. And now, if we come to the current scenario, we will see that there has been increase in food prices, increase in prices of cooking oil, etc. And also, almost half of the rural youth are almost half of the rural population are less than 25 years of age. Education levels are increasing every year. The age is still low, but there are no jobs. agriculture, as I said, cannot anymore. It has become saturated. We are seeing the effects of this rising unemployment levels in the streets. We are getting the news for the past 1 week what is happening throughout India. These are all related to the unemployment scenario in India. And now, without taking much more time, I will just say that what needs to be done in the future. So in the short run, we need to increase the expenditure on NREGS. We need to increase the number of days of work NREGS provides. We need to increase the allocation under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, and it's not only on cereals, but we need to include other essentials as well. We need to include other sources of protein. We need to include some sources of fat and all. And we need to provide livelihood support to the rural community. We need to see that those the children who have dropped out of schools, they are again brought back to the schools, and they are provided bridge classes. The number of children engaged in child labor has increased. The number of children who have been part of child marriage has increased in the pandemic. We need to ensure that the children who are out of schools, they are brought back. And we need to support the National Rural Health Mission. The National Rural Health Mission's budget has been increased in the current budget, but that is mostly in infrastructure costs. We still haven't budgeted enough for the ASHA workers, for the Anganwadi workers. We need to give them the support, but these are all in the short run. In the long run, the most important thing that we need is land reforms. Even in your studies, even the study presented by you, the non-landed laborers were the most affected. We need to give land to the tillers. We need to ensure this so that they can have a dignified livelihood. If they don't have rights over their own land, they will never have a dignified livelihood. We will constantly have this cycle of migrant workers coming to the cities during the non-agricultural season and then again going back to work in others' lands in the villages during the agricultural season. And most importantly, we need to support the cooperative and collective economic opportunities. Like it was mentioned during Ashish's presentation, that collective economic opportunities, cooperative opportunities, these are essential for the future. So we need to support that. I would like to end my presentation with this, and thank you once again, and congratulations on this report.
Thank you very much, Kaustav, for your presentation, as well as you have been doing research for ActionAid as well. So with all your knowledge and data from your not only the government data, but also the data from your studies. So it has been very rich, your presentation. Thank you very much. We have run out of time, but we'll just mention a few questions that have come up. One is from Peter de Cruz, who is saying that only networking can help us reach us to the poor and vulnerable. And Lancy Lobo, he has asked Roshan to mention how women farmers engage in networking, because networking can also help them to deal with emergencies and so on. Is there any other question? Okay, so we'll just take a round of questions and then afterwards a few responses. Anyone over here can, Suresh's hand is up. Do you want to ask a question?
No, sir, I don't have any question.
Okay, then you can put your hand down. Okay.
Very beginning it was raised.
Okay. Anybody? Yes. So any other question from the chat? So
No, there is no.
The report will be, soft copy of the report will be distributed. Yes, Alvin, you want to say something?
No, I said there is no question.
Okay, okay.
No other question.
Yeah, but there were yeah, there's the question of networking. I think this has come out very well in Ashish Kotari's stories of resilience, how solidarity has helped. So Roshan, could you say something from the women's farmers' point of view? How networking among women farmers have helped them? Networking.
Sure. I'll just give a small, it's absolutely correct that, being part of networks and collectives and shared spaces like that is extremely, as not only in the post-pandemic world, but otherwise has also been seen as a great way to cope with crisis. And as I mentioned in our study as well in Makam, we've also noticed that, being part of networks like SHGs, at a village level, or being part of cooperatives at a larger cluster level, has really provided women farmers with not only financial support systems in terms of crisis, but also social support systems, which are extremely important, for them, for survival and, building resilient lives. Also, as Ashish mentioned, when you look at collectives like DDS, Deccan Development Society, NEN, from Nagaland itself, they really clearly show that it's the power of those collectives itself that has really sort of helped women cope with crisis situations. And I'll just like to cite a small example from Uttarakhand. While I was a part of the study, I was a part of the Uttarakhand chapter. I spent the last 6 years there. And in a small village called Sama in Uttarakhand, in the Bageshwar district, we had almost about 13 to 14 SHGs, of course, led by women. And this was the time that they had harvested their produce of green peas, which is matar in Hindi. And there was tons and tons of green peas, which was otherwise going to go, for a waste or at a very low price because they would not have the bargaining power. Plus the mandis, their mandis are extremely far away. So they're forced to sell at lesser prices. But it was at that time when these women came together, bargained with the local administration, got an entry-level pass for themselves without any other support, even because we were not able to access them. So there was no support in reality that was coming from us as well. And almost 13 to 14 of them went to the administrative office at the block level, got their entry-level pass, secured a transportation van, and went village to village, in that valley. It was led by the Sama village women, but in that entire valley, there were almost 13 to 14 villages, went village to village, collected their produce, and then were able to sell that produce in the village itself. Because otherwise, as you know, the distances in the mountains are enormous, and selling that produce would have been extremely difficult. And because these women were a part of these SHGs, we felt like, sort of not only having that platform, but sort of also giving them the confidence to do so. And they earned fair prices during that time after selling their produce. So I think, yes, you're absolutely right that I wouldn't say networking per se, but forming these networks and being part of these collectives, coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds, looking at the differences as well as the similarities, is extremely crucial for women farmers, particularly. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, sure. So Ashish.
Can I just add? Yeah, Pencil, if there's a minute left. Yeah. Okay. So just adding to what Roshan said, I think, clearly, networking is crucial. There's a few things I think one needs to be mindful of in networking. One is mutual respect. So sometimes what happens is with networking is that there's one organization or somebody who's kind of coming from, like, trying to form an umbrella and coming from above and imposing. Actually, I think networks work very well where you're respecting each other, where you're seeing that everybody has some strength and weaknesses, and we're trying to plug each other's weaknesses and add to each other's strengths. In a network where there's local grassroots action plus civil society helping with, say, for instance, legal or programmatic information and advice, and many other functions that need to be performed in order for these stories to be successful. That's really crucial. But also that I think what networking does, it helps to, or it should help to avoid the problems of upscaling. Normally one tends to think that something is successful, let's just make it bigger and bigger and bigger. That's the sort of tendency of governments and also many NGOs and of course the corporate sector. But what we're trying to say is that instead of upscaling or instead of even replication, where you don't copy a Deccan Development Society exactly as it is, say, in Maharashtra or anywhere else, but you actually learn the lessons from each other. You learn the values, the principles, the processes, what worked, what didn't work, and then have to modify it and apply it in your own situation, which is very unique in many different ways. So it's what we actually call neither upscaling nor replication, but outscaling, where you're learning from each other, creating more and more and more and more of these sorts of initiatives, and then linking together as a network to create the macro impact. Because at the end of the day, we also need to be able to create that macro impact on policy or resisting the powers of private corporations or the state, etc. Just a quick additional point I would like to make on what Kaustav said about agriculture being saturated. That is true, but I think there's also enormous potential for extending agriculture, I'm including here fisheries, forestry, and pastoralism, into processing, where lots of livelihood opportunities are available. The example I gave you from forest in Gadchiroli is where they're no longer just selling the raw material from the forest. They're actually also, at least to some extent, processing things in the village. And so they're actually getting a better livelihood. So there are some people who are doing the picking, collecting, etc., who are good at that, who are good at identifying those things. There are others who are doing the processing. And there are yet others from the village itself who are doing the trading. And what you're then doing is actually you're doubling or tripling the employment potential of the same forest. The same thing can happen with agriculture. The same thing can happen with pastoralism, with fisheries. In Western India now, camel milk is becoming a product that the camel herders are able to sell. This is because the civil society organization has worked with them, and now Amul is also buying into it. So, I think there's, in that sense, enormous potential for increasing land-based, land, forest, water-based livelihoods, broadly agriculture, etc. Beyond its current capacity, where it's only the raw materials, either the crops are sold directly or the raw materials from natural ecosystems are sold directly. If we can add value, process, etc., I think there's tremendous potential. Also crafts, by the way, local nature-based, natural resource-based crafts, possibly a potential of 50 million more employment. I mean, we used to have 150 to 200 million craftspeople working on natural resources. Those have declined sharply because of industrialization and other processes. But that can come back. And there are examples in India where crafts have revived based on organic cotton or forest produce, bamboo, etc. So I think there's lots of potential there.
Thank you, Ashish. Kaustav, any last comment from you?
Yeah, I think, yes, there is potential if we expand. As I said, we need to have a focus on collective efforts. We can't just go on looking at individual efforts. We need to focus on collective efforts. And I would also like to share an example of, like Ashishji was saying, that forest produce. So there's this collective of, now there are cooperative of Irudaya snake catchers cooperative in Tamil Nadu. So they take the venom from the snake and they sell it for medicinal purposes. So it's a cooperative of snake catchers. So historically they have been snake catchers. So these kinds of collective efforts, we need to provide an ecosystem so that these collective efforts can be nurtured. That is what I think should be a focus for the government at any kind of policy level.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kaustav. So we have come to the end of this session. We had a very, very rich and interesting session. We had the unveiling of the study, the fact sheet, and then we had messages from the president of the Jesuit Conference of South Asia, and 3 very good presentations Roshan explained her study on women farmers, and a lot of takeaways from that, especially from the women's perspective. Ashish, presented various stories of resilience, which gives us so many insights, and Kostav also presented some insights on his work. I think some key takeaways from this is that social security system should be strengthened. I think a lot of our policies must focus from the women's perspective. That will help a lot for overall development of the people, especially in rural areas. Then the whole, stress on collective economic activities, having financial, social support systems, networking with mutual respect, and also trying innovative things, especially in areas like agriculture, where if processing and crafts and so on is added, then it will add much more value to what they are already doing. Otherwise, if all these activities are done by corporates, they will only enjoy the profits, and the people on the ground who actually strive to feed us with the food and all the resources, they get pittance. Okay, so thank you very much. I think this has been a very, very enriching session. And now I call upon Suman, who is the secretary at the Secretariat of Social Justice and Ecology of South Asia, to propose the vote of thanks, and we conclude with that.
Thank you so much, Father. I hope I'm audible to all.
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, all. Thank you is such a prayer that cannot be seen or touched. It must be felt by the heart. I feel honored and privileged to get the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this special occasion. On behalf of Indian Social Institute, ISI Delhi, Conference Development Office CDO, Jesuit Conference of South Asia, JCSA, and Social Justice and Ecology Secretariat, SJEA South Asia, I thank the invited speakers. Words are not enough to thank them for their guidance and support to shape this webinar. To mention Mr. Ashish Kothari for his sharing on stories of resilience and lessons that emerged from those stories and solidarity movement during the time of crisis. Thank you so much, sir. Ms. Roshan Rathore for her insight on her involvement with the study of impact of COVID-19 on women farmers of different sectors of livelihood and its findings. Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing this. Mr. Kaustav Mojumdar for his enlightenment on his observations and bringing forward the facts and figures showing the contribution of rural India in country's GDP, but how their lives have been affected during this pandemic. Also for the suggestions and the recommendations you proposed. Thank you so much, sir. My very special thanks to Dr. Jerome Souza, President of JCSA, for his special message of encouragement. A big thanks to Dr. Denzel Fernandez, Executive Director of Indian Social Institute, New Delhi, for moderating this session. Heartfelt thanks to Mr. Shinu Joseph and Dr. Alvin D'Souza and all the individuals who are associated with the study and worked against time to meticulously dot the I's and cross the T's. Thanks to Ms. Tanvi Dogra for her word of welcome and introducing the speaker. Thanks to the tech team for looking after all the technical aspects to help this webinar go smoothly. Last but not the least, thank you our participants in Zoom as well as on YouTube for sparing out time and showing up for this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. I apologize if I have not mentioned by name, but my gratitude to each and everyone who has been walking this journey with us. So thank you once again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roshan, Ashish, and Kostav. Yeah. all the best for your work, and we'll keep sharing our work so that we can all benefit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Hello. Hello.